Friends, digital leaders, innovators, lend me your ears. Welcome to the Winning Digital Customer Show on today, March 15th, which is the Ides of March. For Shakespeare fans out there, we know that this is a very important day in the William Shakespeare play, Julius Caesar. Now, why should we care about that for those of you who are not currently in sophomore high school English? Well, given that it is the Ides of March, I thought it would be fun to take a look at some of the wisdom from Shakespeare that applies to digital leadership and digital transformation. Shakespeare obviously knew little of the world of digital, but a lot of what he wrote about, many of his plays are about leaders, very often kings or other royalty, but not always. But in any case, he had many insightful lessons and insightful observations regarding leadership and regarding transformation, even though it may not have been digital transformation. And one of the reasons, of course, there are many, many playwrights from Shakespeare's era who we never hear about. And of course, Shakespeare is probably one of the most famous playwrights even today. And there's a reason for that, which is, of course, that his messages resonate through time and have a great deal of interesting insight to us in our modern age. So I thought it would be fun to today look at 10 quotes from Shakespeare, which are relevant to you if you are focused on leadership, or digital transformation. So let's dive in. As I mentioned, today, of course, is the Ides of March. Now, some of you may be thinking, what the heck is the Ides of March? Well, the Ides of March simply means halfway. Ides just means halfway in, I don't know, Latin or something. Anyway, but the reason it's relevant to William Shakespeare is that in his famous play, Julius Caesar, I have to warn you, there's a little spoiler alert here in case you haven't yet had a chance to see or read Julius Caesar or read The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. I'm about to tell you that, yes, Julius Caesar is killed. He's no longer alive today, and he's killed in the play Julius Caesar, so I gave you fair warning. And what happens very briefly is that he wakes up in the morning, his wife has had a bad dream that something bad might happen, and the soothsayer, the fortune teller, is warning him to beware the Ides of March. And he goes to the Senate, which is where he's killed, and some of his allies are trying to get his attention and let him know that they are aware that there is a plot to kill him, but he will not listen to them because he says that which touches Caesar shall be talked about last, meaning he wants to focus on the affairs of state. He wants to focus on the reason he's there in the Senate, and because he doesn't attend to that information, he has no advance warning when the attackers kill him and stab him, and in fact, that's the end of the story of Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar is an interesting figure because he really is a figure of transformation. Julius Caesar himself was an army general who ultimately led a revolution against Pompey, against the pre-existing emperor of Rome, killed him and took over, and in a sort of a populist uprising of sorts that ultimately was driven by a desire for transformation in Rome. And so you have a figure here who was very, very successful at getting grassroots support, getting the people behind him to make him emperor, to rule all of Rome. And yet, what's his downfall? Politics. His downfall is that he has so much power that he is not paying attention to those who might be seeking to undermine him, to undo him. And ultimately, it is his ally, his good friend Brutus, who stabs him. And of course, the famous dying line of Julius Caesar, et tu, Brute, which et tu just means, if you know Spanish, you can probably figure it out, even though this is obviously meant to be Latin. And you too, Brutus, meaning you also, even my good friend, are amongst those who have turned against me and have killed me. And of course, he's astonished, he's shocked. And so there's two very famous quotes from Julius Caesar. So what can we learn from this? Well, Caesar quite literally wasn't watching his back. And if you're in a leadership position in a large company, and certainly if you're leading transformation, if you're leading change, there will be those people who come out against it. Brutus is initially Caesar's ally because he recognizes that the change that Caesar is driving is for the good of the country. But ultimately, he's brought around to being against Caesar really for his own personal interests. He's brought around to make a decision to go against him because it will be better for him in the end. And this is the problem that we have in corporate America today. The truth is that we may be leading a transformation for all the right reasons, one that's going to be for the good of the company, in this case, not the country, but the company, for the good of the company, for the good of the company's customers. But you can still expect that there are those who want to stab you in the back. There are those that want to undermine the transformation for some reason, no matter what positive reasons there may be for the change you're driving. There's always people for whom that is not what they want to see happen. Maybe they don't like the idea of change. Maybe they don't like the direction of change. Maybe they're just afraid that it makes you more powerful than them. These are some of the reasons, by the way, that Caesar is killed. And similarly, you got to watch your back. And when someone tells you to beware the Ides of March, if you get some insight that there's politics, you should probably be a little bit more paranoid than you might have previously been. Because, of course, you don't want to put your mind always in the mindset of, paranoia. But you got to know that many a great initiative have failed because of successful saboteurs. I did a whole other podcast, live cast on undermining and sabotaging digital transformation, since it's such a common topic. But anyway, and I'm going to go on to many other Shakespearean ideas that are on other topics, but this is the one I wanted to start with because today being the Ides of March. But watch out for sabotage. Watch out for saboteurs, even for those that you think are your allies. You got to have one eye open when you sleep, when you're given a major leadership role, because that's just the way of the world. So that's the first one. Let's move on. The next one is probably Shakespeare's most famous quote from the play Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question. Now, this is another downer. I'm just realizing as I look at these quotes, there's a lot of death, isn't there? There's a lot of death in Shakespeare. Yeah. Well, we're gonna get the upside of it. We're gonna get the inspirational part. So Hamlet, of course, famously is contemplating suicide, whether he should kill himself or not. Now, hopefully suicide is not a big problem in most digital transformations. But here's where I think it's relevant. What has got Hamlet so upset? Why is Hamlet so depressed? And the answer, change. Transformation. Change that he is not happy with. What's the transformation here? Well, in this case, his uncle has killed his father and married his mother. So his family has transformed, and, let's face it, in kind of an icky way. So on the one hand, we can understand why Hamlet would be, at the very least, miffed by this turn of events. But he's so upset. He's so upset by this change that he considers taking his own life. And of course, his trauma and the depths of his despair as a result of this change in his life is what largely the whole play is about. And so I bring it up here, and it kind of connects to what we were talking about with respect to Beware the Ides of March and Et tu, Brute, right? Which is the change in what you expect. Hamlet thought, his father was the king and he was the prince. He was going to come home. His father would still be on the throne. And of course, his whole world has changed around him. Now, you might argue his whole world didn't change. Of course, it's very upsetting to have these events occur, but he magnifies the significance of these events. Not that they're insignificant, but obviously there's much more to live for than just the question of this issue. And it consumes his thinking and his life. And so I highlighted here just as an example, as a dramatic example of the reality that when you drive transformation, you are potentially making major change in the world of, well, maybe multiple different groups, including your customers, but in particular your employees. And when you drive that level of change, some people are going to be upset. Some people may even despair. So think of Hamlet, who is driven to such dramatic depths. Of course, Shakespeare is a lot of death, blood, and gore, but think of that as the dramatic extension of the reality that occurs. And you have to be able to lift people up and figure out how to inspire them and have them see the positive future, and not just become in despair about the fact that the world of the company that they maybe thought was going to stay the same is now changing. So that's my second quote. The next one relates to another very famous Shakespearean quote. It relates to one of the most important principles that I think drive successful businesses in general, as well as digital projects. So the quote is from Shylock in The Merchant of Venice when he's on trial. I think it's when he's on trial. And he's Jewish, and he's speaking of the anti-Semitism and the dehumanization of Jews in Italy. And he says, he's pointing out that he's a human being. He says, if you prick us, do we not bleed? Us meaning Jews. If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? So why have I included that quote? More death, right? More blood. Boy, Shakespeare, that was the day. You know, you wanted to get people's attention. You had to have this kind of stuff. Kind of true today too, isn't it? Empathy. I will put this quote in here because of empathy. The truth is, understanding your customers and all your stakeholders, employees as well, but let's just talk about customers as human beings in their full complexity is a critical part of being able to successfully achieve the goals of your transformation. I talk in my book, Winning Digital Customers, about winning the love of your customers being one of the most important, if not the most important criteria for business success. And also about the fact that in order to win the love of your customers, the first thing you have to do is you have to understand their needs. You have to truly understand what is hurting them right now. What pain are they in? What fears do they have? What hopes and desires do they have? How can you therefore do a better job of meeting their needs? So humanizing and really understanding the customers that you're targeting is a critical success criteria. And that, of course, is what Shylock is trying to do in this play, making sure that his judge and whoever else he's speaking to here acknowledges and sees him for a full human being and not just some kind of a stereotype. And so my point to you is not so much about bias or anti-Semitism, although of course we want to avoid those things, but about also not caricaturizing or not thinking of your customer in a one-dimensional way, but recognizing the full depth of the reality of who your customers are. And a lot of the work that I do and a lot of what's described in my book is specific techniques for how you can make sure that you're doing the research to understand the customer and aggregating it together in things like customer personas to be able to make sure that you really do recognize the full depth and three-dimensionality of your customers. All right, see, Shakespeare is so wise. Who knew that what Shylock was really trying to say is that you need a customer persona, see? Amazing what you can learn when you read Shakespeare. So here's another Hamlet quote, very simple. Brevity is the soul of wit. Nice short quote. What's Hamlet trying to say? He's trying to say, keep it short, keep it brief, be succinct. Funny thing coming from the guy doing a 30-minute live cast, right? But when we communicate through digital means, we have to know that people have a shorter and shorter and shorter attention span, and we need to get right to the point. We need to make sure that when someone looks at our web page or goes to our mobile application or even looks at the page for our mobile application in the iTunes store or the Play Store, any communication we have, an email, we've got to get right to the point and we've got to be really clear about what the value proposition is so that person can get excited and want to learn more. We can't expect them to wade through a paragraph of information just to get to the point of why they should buy from you. So always think less is more today in all communications. And that's really all Hamlet was saying when he said brevity is the soul of wit. I would argue brevity is the soul not only of wit, but of effective persuasiveness. And that's so much of what we need to do to be effective in any kind of digital communication, whether it's sales and marketing or whether it's customer support or anything else that you're looking to communicate around. Brevity is the soul of wit. I shall move on. All that glitters is not gold. Another quote from The Merchant of Venice. You'll see how some of Shakespeare's greatest plays also yielded some of his greatest quotes. So the application, I think, of this quote is sometimes in the effort to improve, to transform, to innovate, there's forces within an organization that want to chase shiny new objects. Let's create a virtual reality application, right? Let's figure out how to incorporate artificial intelligence and machine learning, whatever it may be. And that's quite possibly all good stuff to do, possibly, but it might not be gold, right? Just because it glitters, just because it's cool and new and shiny, it might not be delivering the gold, in other words, the value. A more effective approach is to start with understanding how can you serve the customer better? How can you better meet their needs and therefore be more differentiated from your competitors, therefore be worth more to your customers, drive more customer loyalty, less desire to negotiate on price or shop around on price. That's the goal because that's what's going to drive more revenue and profitability for your organization. And it may be that drones are the answer. It may be that augmented reality is the answer in your case, but you don't want to start from the glitter. You want to start from the value and then figure out what are the technologies that are available today or the different types of ways to interact with customers? Is it an Alexa skill? Whatever it may be. But you want to start from the value, not start from the glitter, because, say it with me, all that glitters is not necessarily gold. All right, let's keep going here. Another quote from Hamlet. Hamlet says, I think to Ophelia. By the way, those that know me know that my background is actually in theater. I have both a bachelor's and a master's degree in theater, if you can believe it. Doesn't that sound like money well spent? Actually, I get a tremendous amount of use every day out of so many of the things I've learned from my time working in the performing arts. So I do think it was actually, well, I don't know if any college is money well spent, to be perfectly honest, as a father who's now in the process of writing big tuition checks for my kids. But in any case, I digress. The point is, I had a chance to get immersed in Shakespeare at a relatively young age. And well, it's kind of fun for me now. I don't read it regularly to go back through some of these quotes. So Hamlet says, I believe to Ophelia, his sort of girlfriend, he says, we know what we are, but we know not what we may be. Now, I think the applicability for this is one of the challenges that companies have is they get stuck in who they are, the way they think about themselves. I write in my book about my work with Blockbuster and how I worked on a team that built a whole digital vision and strategy for Blockbuster right when they were at their peak, or maybe just a tad after they were at their peak. And had they followed that strategy successfully, I mean, it was a lot like what you see from Netflix today. But man, they were so committed to being a company that was about stores and getting you into their retail store and selling you stuff in the store, not sending video to your home as a primary form of their business. And they just couldn't get past it. You know, they know what they are, but they just didn't know what they may be, or they weren't willing to really embrace a vision of who they could be, which is different from who they are. In contrast, I told in another live cast the story of 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven, most people don't know, I didn't know until I read it in another book recently, started out as an ice company. You know, back in the icebox days where, like, I don't know, in 1900 or whenever, when we didn't have refrigeration in our houses. So you had a giant sort of cooler, and at the bottom there was a place for a huge cube of ice. 7-Eleven, that wasn't their name when they started, but their initial business was supplying ice, and as a place you could go pick up the ice for your refrigerator, I think what was called back then an icebox. And then they realized that in addition to selling ice, since they had ice, they could sell milk and eggs and other things that needed to be kept cool because they had this warehouse full of ice anyway. And they invented the convenience store, a place near you. It wasn't a whole grocery store, but it was a place that sold the kind of essentials in addition to ice, which was also an essential. And now, of course, fast forward, if they'd have stuck with their original business of selling big cubes of ice, that obviously have been long gone. But they changed and they developed a vision of who they could become. When ice became less of a market, they embraced the convenience store component, renaming themselves 7-Eleven, and of course put stores everywhere. So we all have a place to go at odd hours to get the things that we need. So there's an example, unlike Blockbuster, that saw a vision of who they may be and was able to embrace it. So it's possible, but it requires that conscious shift, which you as a leader, you need to figure out how to get people to make that shift. And that's why I like this quote from Hamlet. We know what we are, but we know not what we may be. Another quote, this one from Romeo and Juliet. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Now, this is, of course, Romeo speaking to Juliet. They're from warring families, and she's concerned because their names are their last names are two families that have a legacy of hating each other. And he's saying, why should we be so worried about what something is called? What really matters is what something is. And I think that's true. And I think one of the problems we often have in business in general, and I see it all the time and with my clients with digital transformation projects, is we can get stuck on terms. And those terms, they don't necessarily mean the same things to everybody, and they can get in our way. For example, someone will say, well, we need a strategy. Someone else will say, well, we need a strategy. I agree, we need a strategy. Or I disagree, I don't think we need a strategy. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where I would say to someone, well, what is your strategy? And someone would say, we don't really have a strategy. And someone else would say, what do you mean? Of course we have a strategy. Now, how can two people working on the same executive team disagree about whether they have a strategy? Well, it's usually because they mean something different by the word strategy, or the word brand, or the word roadmap, or the word vision. So many words that we throw around every day aren't necessarily concrete in terms of what they mean. So just bear that in mind. If you find yourself getting in discussions, are we really a customer-centric company? Are we really digitally centric? All these phrases. Is this truly innovative? They're not really all that useful. If you find yourself in an argument where the core of the argument is, what does the word innovation mean? Or what does the word strategy mean? Or what does the word digital mean? You're probably barking up the wrong tree. Instead, back up and say, what is it we really want? What is it we really care about? Making the customer happier, driving more revenue, reducing our costs by moving calls out of our call center in a way that we can serve the customer less expensively, making our employees happier, reducing turnover, whatever it may be. Get specific about what you want. Speak in normal, plain language. And you can always later decide, and we're going to call this plan to accomplish these goals, our 2021 strategy. That's fine. You can go back to those words if you like, but get past the word to the thing that you're really talking about. And that's going to help you get past what may be sort of silly arguments about what a word means. So that's what I take from this quote from Romeo and Juliet. We're in the home stretch here, guys. This is a quote I've used before, but I come back to it again and again from 12th Night. Some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. And I said in a prior live cast, this is probably the only Shakespearean quote I've mentioned in a prior one of these shows. I don't know that I even believe that some are born great. I do believe that there are some people who strive for greatness, and there are other people who find themselves in a situation where the demands placed on them require them, or at least give them the opportunity to step forth to a new level of greatness. Certainly this crisis we've had over the last year with COVID is an example of that. So many people in roles, whether it's in IT or marketing or operations, all of a sudden we're asked to solve seemingly impossible problems. And I'm sure there's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of stories of executives who rose to new heights and figured out how to do things in days that normally would take months or years, who came up with innovative solutions to problems they never would have thought they would have had to solve. And in some cases, who saved their companies, who saved their employees' jobs. In some cases, of course, in the healthcare world, save people's lives. So that's what it is to have greatness thrust upon you. You don't automatically become great, but what's thrust upon you is that opportunity. And I think that in this world we live in today, many executives find themselves in companies where their industries are changing. And the only way that company is really going to succeed and thrive is through dramatic transformation, challenging though it may be. So I think that this quote, the main point of this quote is the last part, right? Yes, some are born great, maybe. Some achieve greatness, of course. But sometimes greatness finds you or the opportunity. And I think I would encourage everyone listening to be thinking about what is happening around me, what is happening with my job, or even other parts of your life, which is an opportunity for you to be great and step up and deliver at a whole new level. Okay. Another famous quote, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages, from the play As You Like It. So why do I have this quote here? It's important in thinking about our customers and our relationship with our customers to think of it as a story. And that's really what Shakespeare's saying here. Life is a story. People come and go, and we go through different stages. Now, in the play, he talks about the stages of life, from being an infant to being a small child, to being an older child, to being a young person, to being a middle-aged person, to being an older person. And that's one story, one arc. And some brands have those kind of relationships. American Express needs to think about their relationship with a customer from not when they're a baby, but from when they're young enough to just have their very first credit card, all the way through their entire life cycle, to the point where they pass away and might want to bequeath their frequent flyer miles to their children, and whether they're going to allow them to do that or not, and how they're going to handle a situation like that. And in other cases, we have a customer journey, which isn't necessarily measured in so many decades, but is across an omni-channel experience, cutting across multiple customer purchases, multiple customer relationships. And by the way, some of our customers have different, it says one man plays many parts. One of our largest clients is the Avis Budget Group in car rental. And we have to know that the same customer comes to us at different times and plays different parts. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, sometimes they're booking a rental car for business purposes, and they're kind of in one mode, in one part, and they have certain needs. And at other times, they're booking it for a vacation, same customer, but they're playing a different part. So, and you probably have that in whatever industry you're in as well. Different points in time, other times, customers are looking to buy something new, and they want to, their part is I'm shopping for something new. versus another time they come to you and they're just looking for a repair of something, or they're looking for advice on how to better use the product they've already purchased. So those customers, they change over time. They go through different stages, and mapping all that out, we do a lot of work around not only personas, but customer journey mapping to really think of the story of the experience of the customer over time. And so I think of that when I think of Shakespeare's quote that all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. Maybe in your case, it's your business is really just creating customer stories, and all your customers are characters in those stories. All right, moving on. A quote from Measure for Measure: "Our doubts are traitors and make us lose the good we oft might win by fearing to attempt." In other words, when we are afraid to do the things that we think would be good to do because we're doubtful, then the risk, the downside is we never achieve the great things that are possible if we could overcome those doubts. And one of the things I see every day in this transformational world that we're in is that you can never be certain what the outcome of what you do is. I would love to be able to tell my clients, if we redesign the app in this way, I guarantee you that 63% more of your customers will immediately start, you can't know for sure. The bigger change you're trying to drive, the less certain you're going to be about what the outcome is going to be. So you have a couple options. One option is to say, well, I don't want to do anything that's that uncertain. And some companies even set up structures to avoid doing anything uncertain. Like they say, well, if you want capital budget for your project, you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that within 2 years, we will have 175% return on investment. Well, you know what? If you require that level of certainty, then if there's even a hair of uncertainty or doubt, you're not going to undertake new projects. And some of those things that you fail to undertake could be the thing that 10x is the size of your company. Some of them could be the things where the entire investment is wasted. Absolutely. But if you really want to transform, you have to be willing to take risks and not let your doubts be traitors. Now, there are many things you can do to address your doubts. For example, create prototypes, do research, do customer testing, do multivariate testing, create minimum viable products. There's many things you can do to reduce risk. And again, for those of you that haven't picked up my book, I talk in great detail about all the risks associated with different types of digital projects and very specific things you can do to reduce those risks. So your doubts are not necessarily always traitors. And I'm going to maybe differ with Shakespeare here. Doubts are not always traitors. They're only traitors if you do the second part of Shakespeare's quote. If you fear to attempt and therefore lose the good you might win. Don't do that. Instead, use those doubts as a signal that there may be some work to do. There may be some more analysis that's needed, some more research, some more steps, or some ways that you can reduce the risk so that if you lose, you won't lose too much while you try to figure out which of the possible things you could do is the one that's going to really make the difference for your company. And I'm going to end with this. I've given you 10 quotes. This is your bonus 11th quote. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Or I would say, if we are underlings. This, of course, is another quote from Julius Caesar, the play that we started with, and is essentially Julius Caesar speaking to Brutus before Brutus kills him, telling him, and Julius Caesar, of course, is somebody who had done great things. He's a man who achieved greatness, didn't just have greatness thrust upon him. He's a man who went from being an army soldier all the way up to being emperor, wasn't born into being an emperor the way prior emperors had been. Very, very impressive figure. And what he's saying here is, don't convince yourself that things beyond your control, in this case, he's talking about stars, astrology, but we could as easily say that, oh man, times are tough, the market is down. So many of the greatest, most successful companies in the world were started during down markets. Warren Buffett started during down markets. Disney and Apple were created during down markets. And of course, hopefully our market is getting ready to come back. Certainly the stock market has been coming back. But when things are tough, whether it's COVID or difficult financial situations, or just something specific to you personally or specific to your business, it's easy and not even wrong to look at those things and say, man, those are some big problems. Those are some big things we have to overcome. But in the end, what Caesar and Shakespeare are saying here is that men can be masters of their fate. Whatever that situation is, plenty of other people have overcome those challenges and actually turned them into advantages and figured out how to make the most of those types of situations. And well, That's what I love to do. That's what I love to do with my clients, is go into a situation where there are challenges, but help be a partner in crafting and figuring out how do we turn this into something that's a massive success. And I've had the privilege and the pleasure to do that a number of times in my life. And well, that's really the essence of my career. And I hope for you that when those situations occur, just like what we were saying before about having greatness thrust upon you, that you're able to take whatever challenging situations you may have been in, or whatever situations you face, and turn it into something where you are a master of your fate, not an underling, but in fact, a champion. So hopefully this has been helpful and useful for you. And now that I've done this, I think I can take a tax deduction for my two degrees in theater. You think? I'll have to ask my accountant if I'm allowed to do that now. But in any case, I'm glad I had a chance to use them a little bit and share some Shakespeare with you on today, the Ides of March. And I don't think you should have to be wearing the Ides of March. Hopefully the Ides of March will be an awesome day for you, because you're not Julius Caesar. With that, have a great day. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.